Hello again, and apologies for the delay. The last couple of weeks were eventful, and to top it all off, I got sick. Beyond all of that, Tekken 8 came out, so it was like this perfect storm of things to happen to get me off track. I do plan on making it up a little today, as we have our first double header, the battle theme and the victory fanfare. Let's go ahead and hear what the originals sound like. The battle themes of the classic Final Fantasy games share a very particular musical element. Can you tell me what that is? Final Fantasies 1 through 6 and 9 all have the iconic bass line to start the track, and there is minimal variation between these. It consists of 2 measures of eighth notes, 6 of them A, and 2 of them 1 note lower, G. While 7 and 8 do not have a near copy of interval and rhythm together, there are some similarities. Instead of 6 A's and 2 G's, 7 uses a different rhythm while keeping a similar interval between notes. For FF8 though, the only thing you can say that is similar is maybe the rhythm of the bass line compared to Final Fantasy VII, sort of making it feel like a derivative of a derivative. This is the one classic Final Fantasy game that has a battle theme where I don't experience that quintessential bass line. However, in what I consider one of his finest works, that recognizable bassline returns. It almost feels intentional that the players would go into battle expecting to hear one thing, only to delay that until the very last boss fight. I know that this series is me creating music for Final Fantasy I in particular, but looking forward to these other songs gives me insight to know how important this introductory hook is, as if anyone doesn't know, and why I need to come up with something that has similar versatility. While the bass lines are similar, the battle themes themselves vary greatly as a showcase to how a simple pattern can be expanded upon. This is sort of a callback to the prelude and how simplicity is necessary for ease of adaptation in the future. These bass lines all share in 2 particular things that I'd like to focus on, excluding 7 and 8. 1. The fact that the introductory bass does not have to continue when the rest of the music starts, thus releasing me from being restricted to what I can do afterwards. And 2, this needs to have at least a teensy bit of catchiness. I won't set my sights so high to create something as iconic as Nobuo Uematsu did, But I think with these two things as my goals, I can create something that serves a similar purpose. So what makes a catchy bass line? Honestly, you'll have to tell me if I was successful, because I'm just grasping at straws and using minimal previous musical knowledge. As far as that previous musical knowledge goes, though, I am using the foundation that I set with the Overworld and Castle Cornelia in using the bass line as the primary force of rhythm. In fact, there are a few more similarities between the pieces, specifically the use of staccato for the instruments in question. Either way, my attempt is played by bass and tenor trombones and sounds a little something like this. I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. As we talked about before, the original starts on A and dips down into G. I wanted to try and pay my respects to that original, so I used the same interval to start. Mine does end up being a quicker pace, and instead of repeating twice, goes upwards. Honestly, there are a ton of similarities between the two, but there's only so much difference one can have with my abilities and knowledge. Regardless, in all the other examples of the original music aside from 9, this is where this pattern would normally end. I chose to continue playing this pattern for most of the song, and was written in tandem with the main melody to complement it. This is what those bass instruments sound like through the first section. I took away the additional note from the intro so it doesn't overload the melody with excessive amounts of notes, leaving those intro instruments a bit less of a driving force than I'd have liked them to be. To combat this, I added in bass strings and cellos to assist in that aspect. Naturally, this isn't quite enough for a big energetic sound to start off a battle theme, so I started attempting to craft a melody that provided a little bit of excitement for the first segment and could also transition into a hint of danger with the second segment. First, here's what it sounds like after adding in the non-staccato bass instruments. And then with all of the brass. For the sake of saving a little bit of time, I did something similar with the woodwinds here like I did with Castle Cornelia, by using some of the woodwinds to accent the melody played by the brass, and others to provide counter melody to said accent. Here's what strings and woodwinds sound like. Instead of playing this first section in totality, I'm going to move on to this little bridge thing I have here. This is the first time I'm actually going to use a Namekian in ways I've heard it used before, by having it do this descending and ascending flutter alongside the flute. This pairs with trumpets and a tuba to bridge into the second sort of atmosphere I'm going for, the danger, if you will. This is how that bridge sounds. This second segment is like the first, except less so. I took away several instruments and only added an extra violin and cello line to make it a little less busy. The notes themselves move at a much slower pace, providing some contrast to the much faster introductory segment. I do have a bit of a complaint in how this turned out, and this is also a good time to talk about the time limits I'm setting on myself. Technically, I have a lot of time to work on each track, but my goal is to create a video every week to cover a track. I could start writing the final boss theme now, but it would be somewhat wasted because it doesn't help me accomplish next week's video. With this in mind, I straight up do not have enough time to really go about experimenting and agonizing over how to make things work like I can do for projects that aren't so time sensitive. This is by design. I want time to be a limited resource. How this applies to this project is that the second part really does deserve a harmony in the mid-lows. There's mostly just a single melody, only added to by the rhythm section. A solid harmony could really tie it together, but I could not get something I was happy with in enough time to make the video. I do feel it important to say that I don't intend to leave things this way. After I complete the project, I plan on first adding the music into the game and playing through it several times to get a true gauge on how it feels to play with, then make adjustments based on that and my own thoughts of listening to every track over and over. There already have been some minor changes to the songs that I've written thus far. There shouldn't ever be drastic changes that render the track unrecognizable, but please know that the product that I have in the video is not necessarily its final form at the end. I plan on releasing final tracks in their own playlist without my ramblings once I fully complete them. Anyway, here's just a sample of that second part. I could have maybe titled this video as a 3-for-1, because Victory and the Victory Fanfare are listed as two separate tracks on the original soundtrack. But at the time of writing, I can't actually place where the intro of Victory Fanfare would play by itself. The original fits in my ever-growing bucket of notes go up to depict a general positive sentiment, so I'll be doing the same. Instrument choices in this can't be too opposed to the battle theme as they transition from one to the other, so the voicing remains very similar with trumpets carrying the melody. Here is my intro to the Victory Fanfare. Much like I mentioned earlier, I'm not entirely pleased with the way all of the sounds come together, and the voicing here will likely change at a later time, but the notes should stay the same. Moving on to the rest of the track, we have a looping pattern with only slight variation between each repeating segment. The focus here was definitely more towards the overall feeling rather than keeping the music interesting. During the rest of the track, tubas join in with trombones for a bouncier rhythm like what we saw with the overworld theme. Flutes and rubber chickens share the same notes, while squidwards and bassoons are the counter melody to those. Here's all the instruments as they start to come together. Now, let's have an example of what this sounds like in the context of, say, leaving Cornelia Castle, entering the overworld, getting an encounter, and then winning said encounter. Despite there being some parts of this that I want to improve upon, I am really happy with the 95% that I have completed. I feel that the music I've written thus far feels cohesive, and for the first time, I legitimately feel like I'm a composer. Do you think that because one can write a few songs and string them together that makes them a composer? As always, please leave any thoughts or criticism in the comments below, as your feedback is so very helpful. If any of this was interesting or entertaining, please consider subscribing for the next video where we will be tackling the Chaos Shrine. But also kinda the Sunken Shrine. But definitely not that sunken shrine. Thanks again, and see you soon.